I hate her on a cellular level. At night, I'm unable to sleep as I lie there grinding my teeth and dreaming of the day when she is made to parade naked through the streets of every town in Britain while the crowds chant shame and throw lumps of excrement at her. Now, you probably know by this stage that those are the words of Jeremy Clarkson writing in the Sun newspaper about Meghan Markle. And the reaction, while outraged, seems to have turned into a debate about whether Jeremy Clarkson is a horrible person or not. And, you know, spoiler alert, I wrote an article about how he was a problem in 2008, calling out his misogyny, calling out his racism, calling out his attitude towards climate change and all kinds of stuff. And the reaction was not to listen to me. The reaction was to leave him presenting shows like Top Gear, shows like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and also still being a fun, chatty guest on shows like Have I Got News for You and QI and things like that. Shows which, for the record, wouldn't dream of putting me on. No, I'm far too partisan, far too opinionated, far too controversial. But that kind of person can be put on just for a bit of fun, just to have a laugh. That is not the issue. And we shouldn't be dragged into a debate about that, and indeed about whether or not he should apologise or whether he has apologised, which he hasn't really done. He's kind of said it was about Game of Thrones, which fails to answer the questions: is it all right to fantasise about vile, misogynistic violence if it's a reference to Game of Thrones? And is it possible that a couple of the scenes in Game of Thrones might have felt a bit like a fantasy of violent misogyny towards women? And should we be asking why they keep making shows with those scenes in? We need instead to address how widespread and deep-seated misogyny is within our culture. At the weekend, I went out and did what I suppose you might call my bit for women's rights. I went and spoke to show solidarity at a protest about the women's revolution that's going on in Iran. And I'll come back to that in a second. But at the same time, the Sun newspaper was publishing this garbage. And the Sun, you might be aware, it's a very cheap newspaper, and that's because it is subsidised by advertisers like supermarkets, like holiday companies, people who buy advertising space in the Sun, so that the Sun can then print disgusting things like that, sell them incredibly cheaply in newspapers, many of whom are sold to people who actually are buying it because they want, you know, the TV listings or the vouchers, or because they've always traditionally bought it and they haven't really thought about what they're buying, or indeed because they want to do the crossword or read about the football. And those newspapers then also get left on trains and buses and in waiting rooms. And those kind of horrible words are spread around our society. And in part, it is my money that does so, because I buy holidays and I buy things from supermarkets. And I cannot help being a part of that machine, because I'd have to starve to death and never leave the house to avoid funding those people. What I was doing at the weekend was trying to help highlight what's going on in Iran. As you may be aware, in September, Mahsa Amini, a Kurdish woman, was executed by the morality police for having a few strands of her hair showing. And subsequently there were mass protests in which 500 people have been killed and 18,000 arrested. And the Iranian regime has now started executing those who were arrested. 2 young guys were executed last week, and they say that they are now going to start mass executions. On Sunday, I was coming home, not super late, about 10:30, from a party at a friend's house, a Christmas party. I was walking towards the train station in Peckham, and a car pulled up next to me and a man wound the window down. And out of the driver's seat, he screamed no more than a metre or two from my face, "You fucking cunt!" And I don't know whether he's seen me on TV sticking up for women's rights and he felt the need to express that level of rage, or whether in the dark streets of Peckham, I look a little bit like his ex-girlfriend or some woman who shortchanged him in a supermarket. I don't know. But I know that we're living in a culture where that level of misogyny is pervasive, not just here, but all around the world. sometimes when I go to these protests about other parts of the world, like Iran, there's a sense of like, we need to show solidarity because things are so much better here, and we need to help them to catch up. And that forgets a number of things. It forgets that things are terrible here. 3 women a week being killed by their partner or ex-partner in the UK. It forgets that things haven't always been as bad in Iran as they are now. Go back a few decades and women were not obliged to wear headscarves in Iran. Women had a lot more freedom than they had now. Things are getting worse all around the world. We look at the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the US, even in places which are supposed to be Western or further ahead or whatever you think they might be. The situation for women is getting worse as often as it gets better, if not more so. What happened with the Me Too movement? A couple of people got arrested. Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein. That's pretty much the whole list. Despite the fact that literally every woman I know talked about being sexually harassed. And even that movement, I felt like it got into the media because at heart it was about how difficult it is for women to be so incredibly sexy. And it still doesn't speak out loud about how the problem women have isn't that we're just so beautiful that people can't resist being attracted to us. The problem women have is so much more fundamental than that. We are not lusted after, we are hated. Absolutely brutally hated, quite overtly, not only by Jeremy Clarkson, but by all the people along the production line who saw those words and went, yeah, let's print it. For all the people along the production line who knew perfectly well the stuff he'd said in the past, who knew that he'd smacked a producer in the face for bringing in the wrong sort of sandwich and went, no, it's fine, we'll put him on. But Kate Smurthwaite's CV, we'll leave that lying on the floor of the office, shall we? We'll ignore that because she's a bit of an extremist. I'll tell you what is extreme. What is extreme is the level of hatred that exists for women. And what is even more extreme than that is the way that we do not talk about it. And how can we ever solve these problems if we don't talk about it? If we waste our time putting up, posters in pubs asking if you're uncomfortable on a date and don't go far enough as to actually sit down and admit that misogyny is rife. Absolutely rife. It doesn't start and end with Jeremy Clarkson. It starts and ends with all of us, and we all need to be a part of bringing it out into the open and challenging it and changing it. This was quite an emotional one for me. I really appreciate people sponsoring my work so that I can continue to make videos talking about issues like this and talking about the issues that they won't let me on TV in case I start bringing them up. And this is the outlet that I end up getting for them. So I really appreciate your support, and I'll see you next week.